I never thought that 30 minutes of being a good person would lead to my daughter calling me a disgrace in front of a room full of millionaires. But here we are, and I honestly need to know if I'm the one who lost my mind or if the world has just become that heartless. I was standing there, soaked in sweat and grease, while my son-in-law's father looked at me like I was something he'd stepped in on the sidewalk. And my own child wouldn't even meet my eyes because she was too busy apologizing for my existence to people who wouldn't give her the time of day if she weren't married to their bank account. Was I wrong for putting a stranger's life above a dinner reservation? Or has my family completely traded their souls for a seat at a fancy table? I want you to listen to what happened and tell me honestly if you would have just driven past a person in need just to make sure the appetizers didn't get cold. To understand how I ended up being the villain in a story where I was the only one doing the right thing, you have to understand the dynamic of my family over the last 2 years. My daughter, Sarah, married into the Sterling family about 18 months ago. The Sterlings aren't just rich. They own a private jet and have a wing in a hospital named after them rich. My late husband and I were middle class. He worked in construction, and I've been a nurse for 30 years. We worked hard, we saved, and we gave Sarah everything she ever needed, but apparently, a lifetime of love and stability doesn't carry as much weight as a trust fund and a penthouse overlooking the park. Since she married Julian, Sarah has changed. She speaks differently, she dresses in clothes that cost more than my first car, and she's developed this frantic, desperate need to be accepted by Julian's parents, Arthur and Eleanor. They are cold, calculated people who view life as a series of transactions. And they have never hidden the fact that they think Julian married down by choosing my daughter. Sarah would spend hours practicing how to hold a crystal wine glass, or researching the pedigree of whatever billionaires yet they were visiting next. It broke my heart to see her so terrified of her own shadow, constantly checking her phone to see if she'd offended Julian's mother with a text message. She'd stopped visiting me at the house I raised her in, saying the neighborhood was too loud, or that the Sterlings might see her car parked in a driveway that didn't have a heated entrance. I tried to ignore the distance growing between us, telling myself she was just adjusting to a new world, but the unification dinner was the moment I realized my daughter wasn't just adjusting. She was disappearing. So, when the invitation came for this unification dinner, at an incredibly exclusive, 5-star restaurant downtown, Sarah called me no less than 10 times to remind me of the stakes. She told me Arthur was considering putting Julian in charge of their European expansion, and any embarrassment could jeopardize their future. I told her, Sarah, honey, I'm your mother, not a liability, but she just kept emphasizing the dress code and the importance of being exactly on time. I even took the afternoon off work, spent a fortune on a dress I'll probably never wear again, and left my house 2 hours early just to ensure that no amount of traffic could make me the problem of the evening. I was driving down the old highway. The sun was just starting to dip, and I was actually feeling good about myself. I was listening to the radio, thinking about how proud my husband would be to see Sarah so successful, even if her new world felt a little alien to me. I had even prepared small talk topics that wouldn't bore Arthur, reading up on the latest market trends just so I wouldn't sound like a simple nurse in front of the high and mighty Sterlings. That's when I saw the smoke. It wasn't a lot at first, just a thin gray wisp coming from a car that had veered off into the ditch near a sharp curve. Most people were just zooming past, probably thinking someone else would handle it, or they were too busy with their own lives to notice. But as I got closer, I saw a woman frantically trying to pull someone out of the passenger side. My nursing instincts didn't even give me a choice. My foot hit the brake before I could even think about the white silk dress I was wearing. I pulled over, grabbed the emergency kit from my trunk, and ran down the embankment. It was bad. An elderly man was slumped in the passenger seat, unconscious, and the woman, who turned out to be his daughter, was in total shock, screaming that he wasn't breathing. The next 45 minutes were a blur of adrenaline and chaos. I had to pull him out because the engine compartment was starting to catch fire. I'm 60 years old, but I don't know where the strength came from. I just hauled him onto the grass. He'd gone into cardiac arrest from the impact. I started CPR immediately. I was on the ground in the dirt, pumping his chest, shouting instructions to the woman to call 911 and keep his head stabilized. My dress was ruined within seconds. The silk tore as I moved, and the mud from the ditch seeped into the fabric, turning the pristine white into a muddy, bloody mess. My phone was vibrating in my pocket. I knew it was Sarah, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, this man was dead. I could feel his ribs under my palms, the terrifying fragility of a human life held together only by the rhythm of my own hands. Every time I breathed for him, I tasted the metallic tang of smoke and the salt of my own sweat. I didn't care about the restaurant. I didn't care about the Sterlings. All that mattered was the faint, flickering pulse beneath my fingers. I stayed with him until the paramedics arrived, gave them the rundown of his vitals, and waited until they had him stabilized in the ambulance. The daughter was sobbing, hugging me, calling me an angel sent from heaven. Her hands were shaking as she thanked me. Her voice cracked with a terror I knew all too well from my years in the ER. By the time they cleared out and I got back to my car, I was a complete mess. My hair was matted, my dress was torn, and I looked like I'd been in a street fight. I looked at the clock and realized I was 40 minutes late for the dinner. My hands were still trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I looked in the rearview mirror and barely recognized myself. I had a smear of grease across my forehead and a dark stain on my shoulder. I tried calling Sarah, but she didn't pick up. I knew she was already at the table. I had a choice. I could go home, change and miss the whole thing, or I could show up as I was and explain the emergency. I thought surely they would understand. Life and death trump a steak dinner, right? I honestly believed that even the cold-hearted Sterlings would see the necessity of what I'd done. So, I drove to the restaurant. The valet looked at me like I was a vagrant, but I pushed past him, ignoring his attempt to block the entrance. I walked into that gold-leaf dining room, feeling every eye in the place on my stained clothes and disheveled hair. The scent of expensive perfume and aged wine hit me like a wall, clashing with the smell of smoke and burnt rubber that still clung to my skin. When I reached the table, the silence was deafening. Arthur Sterling put down his wine glass with a slow, deliberate click. Julian looked horrified. And Sarah? She looked like she wanted the earth to swallow her whole. Before I could even get the words, "I'm so sorry," out of my mouth, Julian's mother, Eleanor, sighed and said, "I told you, Julian, that some people simply don't have the breeding for punctuality." I tried to explain. I told them there was an accident, that I had to perform CPR, that I saved a man's life. Sarah didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask if the man survived. She just hissed at me. "Mom, how could you do this? You couldn't just call the police? You had to get in the middle of it and show up here looking like this?" Her voice was full of a venom I had never heard before, a cold, sharp edge that cut deeper than any insult from Eleanor. So, that is where I stood, in the middle of a room full of people who value a schedule more than a human heart. I was exhausted, shaken from the adrenaline crash, and my own daughter was treating my act of service like a personal insult. I had to make a decision right then about whether to apologize for saving a life or to stand my ground. Before I tell you what I said to them, and how this dinner ended in a way none of them expected, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have driven past that burning car to make sure you were on time for your wealthy family? Or would you have done exactly what I did and faced the consequences? Let me know, because I'm starting to feel like I'm the crazy one here. The silence at the table stretched on until Arthur finally spoke. He didn't even look at me. He looked at Julian and said, "This is the distinguished guest we were waiting for? She looks like she crawled out of a gutter. Julian, we are trying to discuss a multi-million-dollar merger, and your mother-in-law looks like a common laborer." I felt the heat rise in my chest. I looked at Sarah, waiting for her to defend me, to say, "My mother is a hero." But instead she leaned over and whispered, "Mom, please just leave. You're making a scene. I'll send you a ride, just go home and we'll talk about this later." That was the breaking point. I didn't leave. I pulled out the chair next to Sarah, the heavy velvet chair, and I sat down. I looked Arthur right in the eye, and I said, "I might look like a common laborer to you, Arthur, but the grease on my hands is from saving a man who has a family who loves him. The blood on my sleeve is from a heart that started beating again, because I didn't think a dinner was more important than a life. If that makes me an embarrassment to this table, then I am damn proud to be one." The table went dead quiet. Eleanor began to fan herself as if my very presence were a foul odor. And Julian looked like he was trying to calculate the cost of the damage I was doing to his career. I turned to my daughter and said, "Sarah, I raised you to be a person of character. I stayed up nights when you were sick, I worked double shifts to pay for your school, and I taught you that the most important thing you can be in this world is kind. If you are more ashamed of my dirty dress than you are proud of the fact that your mother saved a life today, then I haven't just lost my evening, I've lost my daughter." I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was the last remnant of the girl I used to know. But she didn't speak. She just looked down at her $500 plate and stayed silent. I stood up, took a piece of bread from the basket because I hadn't eaten all day, and walked out of that restaurant with my head held high. I didn't wait for a ride. I walked to my car, drove home, and cried. Not because of what the Sterlings said, but because of the look of disgust on Sarah's face. 2 days later, I got a knock on my door. It wasn't Sarah. It was the woman from the highway and her father. He was in a wheelchair, still weak but alive. They had tracked me down through my license plate. They brought me flowers and a simple card that said, "Thank you for being the person who stopped." They told me the man was a retired teacher who spent his weekends volunteering at a local shelter. We sat on my porch and talked for hours. He told me about his grandkids, his garden, and how he had been on his way to buy a gift for his wife's birthday when the tire blew. He looked at me with such genuine gratitude that for a moment, the memory of that terrible dinner faded. As they were leaving, Sarah's car pulled into the driveway. She saw them, saw the flowers, and she looked confused. She came inside and started to apologize, but it wasn't a real apology. She said the Sterlings were under a lot of pressure, and that I should have understood the importance of the night. She actually had the nerve to say that I sabotaged Julian's promotion on purpose because I was jealous of their lifestyle. I stopped her right there. I told her that if she wanted to be part of a family that valued appearances over humanity, that was her choice, but she was no longer welcome to bring that toxicity into my home. I told her that until she could look at my greasy hands and see the strength in them instead of the dirt, we had nothing to talk about. She called me selfish. She said I was choosing a stranger over my own flesh and blood. I told her I was choosing reality over a hollow performance. It's been 3 weeks, and I haven't heard from her. Julian's European expansion got delayed because Arthur found some other flaw in Julian's character, proving that no matter how much Sarah sacrificed for them, she would never be enough. They are now living in a state of constant anxiety, trying to please a man who cannot be pleased, while I am sitting here with my peace of mind. In the end, I realized that some people are so poor that all they have is money. I lost a dinner, and maybe I've temporarily lost a daughter, but I saved a life and I kept my soul, and I wouldn't trade that for 1,000 dinners with the Sterlings. This experience taught me that your value isn't defined by the clothes you wear or the company you keep, but by what you're willing to do when no one is watching and there's nothing in it for you. If you are on my side and think that a human life is worth more than a social reputation, please like this video. It helps me know that there are still people out there with their priorities straight. Subscribe for more stories like this where we dive into the real, messy, and emotional parts of life. Don't forget to share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far by kicking Sarah out? Or did she get exactly what she deserved? I'll be reading your responses, and I'll see you all in the next story.